The puppet's eyes opened. Not blinked, not fluttered, but opened, like twin cellar doors creaking wide on hinges rusted with malice. I had been staring at the marionette for what felt like hours. The antique shop's musty air thick with the scent of forgotten things and unspoken stories. It sat propped against a chipped porcelain doll, a silent sentinel amidst the clutter of forgotten toys. Its painted grin, once charming, now seemed predatory. A wolf's smile in a child's disguise. I told myself it was the dim light, the way the afternoon sun slanted through the dusty window, playing tricks on my eyes. But my gut, that knot of instinct that had kept me alive through countless late nights on the Vegas streets, screamed otherwise. This wasn't right. I had come to the shop seeking distraction, a temporary escape from the lingering chill of the carnival and the echoes of that infernal whistle. The new casino glittered where twisted metal used to stand. But everywhere I turned, something reminded me of the Pierrot. The way children's laughter sounds, the black and white patterns of the tiles, the sight of a silver dime glinting on the sidewalk. The shop owner, a wizened old woman with eyes like polished stones, had warned me about the puppet. "Don't touch him, son," she'd rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "He's got a history, that one. A dark history." I'd scoffed, attributing her words to the eccentricity of her profession. Now, I wasn't so sure. The puppet's gaze intensified, boring into me with an unnerving intelligence. Its tiny wooden hands twitched, as if testing the limits of their strings. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound filled the air, like tiny claws dragging across wood. I felt a prickle of sweat on my forehead, a cold dread seeping into my bones. I wanted to leave, to bolt from the shop, and never look back. But I was frozen, trapped in the puppet's gaze, a moth pinned beneath its malevolent stare. The scratching grew louder, closer. I glanced around the shop, my heart pounding in my chest. The porcelain dolls seemed to watch me, their painted eyes gleaming with a knowing malice. A rocking horse began to creak back and forth, its empty saddle swaying rhythmically. The air grew colder, the scent of dust and decay intensifying, filling my nostrils with the stench of something ancient and evil. I felt a presence beside me, a cold spot on my skin, as if a shadow had detached itself from the wall and was now standing at my side. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it, a silent, malevolent force that radiated outwards, filling the shop with its oppressive presence. The puppet's mouth moved, just a fraction, a subtle tightening of its painted lips. But it was enough. I heard a voice, a whisper in my mind. A voice that was both ancient and childlike, terrifying and seductive. "Play with me," it whispered. The lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the shop. The scratching grew louder, closer, until it was right behind me. A relentless and terrible sound. I wanted to scream, but my throat was paralyzed. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. And then, I felt something brush against my neck. A cold, wooden finger, and a high-pitched, reedy giggle. The diner coffee tasted like burnt pennies and regret. I swirled the lukewarm sludge, the oily sheen reflecting the neon glow of the open 24 HRS sign outside. Sunlight was struggling to break through the Vegas haze, painting the sky a bruised purple. My reflection stared back, a haggard stranger with haunted eyes and a 5 o'clock shadow that seemed to grow darker by the minute. Sarah's face kept flashing in my mind, her tear-streaked cheeks, the silent accusation in her gaze. Michael Dutton. The thought was a rusty blade twisting in my gut. Guilt was a constant companion. It sat beside me in O'Malley's, a silent drinking buddy. It shadowed me at the gym, adding phantom weight to every lift. It was even there in my dreams, whispering insidious doubts in my ear. I took another swig of the coffee, trying to wash away the taste of failure. It didn't work. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that read Darlene shuffled over. "More coffee, hon?" she asked, her voice raspy. I shook my head. "Just the check, please." She scribbled on a pad, tore off the slip and placed it on the table. As she walked away, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A flash of white pinned to the corkboard near the cash register. A flyer. I picked it up, my heart beginning to pound a heavy, uneven rhythm against my ribs. It was an advertisement for a magic show at a small theater downtown. Jolly's Wonderama. Below the title was a picture of Mr. Jolly himself. A clown. His face was painted a stark white, the makeup cracked and peeling like old paint. 2 thick black teardrops ran from the corners of his eyes, smearing slightly. He wasn't smiling. His expression was vacant, empty, and yet there was something else there, lurking beneath the surface. A subtle hint of malice. The flyer felt cold in my hand, clammy, like touching something dead. The faint, reedy laughter echoed in my memory, the sound that had haunted me since that first night at the carnival. Coincidence? Maybe. Vegas was full of clowns, magicians, and other purveyors of cheap thrills. But the hair on the back of my neck was prickling again, that familiar warning sign that something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. I looked closer at the flyer, my eyes scanning the fine print, the theater's address, the showtimes. And then I saw it. A small detail, almost imperceptible. But it sent a jolt of ice water through my veins. Tucked away in the corner of the flyer, barely visible against the bright yellow background, was a tiny image, a silver whistle. My breath hitched. I crumpled the flyer in my fist, the paper tearing under the force of my grip. This wasn't a coincidence. This was something else. Something darker. Something far more sinister. Darlene returned with my check. She eyed the crumpled flyer in my hand. A flicker of something unreadable in her tired eyes. "You okay, hon?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'm fine." I paid the bill and left the diner, the flyer burning a hole in my pocket. The sun was higher now, but the light seemed dimmer, colder. The city felt different, tainted, as if a dark stain had seeped into its very core. I knew what I had to do. I had to find Mr. Jolly, before he found me. Or worse, before he found someone else. The thought of another child falling prey to that thing made my stomach churn. I wouldn't let it happen. Not again. I drove to the theater, a rundown building on the edge of downtown, its facade crumbling, the paint peeling. The marquee was faded, the letters chipped and broken. It looked deserted, abandoned. But as I got closer, I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible above the city's hum. Laughter. The thin, reedy laughter that haunted my dreams. It was coming from inside the theater. I parked the car and got out, my hand instinctively reaching for the taser that wasn't there anymore. All I had was my rage, my guilt, and a burning desire for revenge. I walked towards the theater, the laughter growing louder, closer. The doors were locked, but I didn't hesitate. I kicked them open, the wood splintering, the hinges screaming in protest. The theater was dark, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. The only light came from a single spotlight shining on the stage. And there, standing in the center of the stage, was Mr. Jolly. He was wearing a tattered clown costume, his face painted a stark white, the black teardrops smeared and running. He was holding a silver whistle to his lips, and he was blowing. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched shriek that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. But it wasn't the whistle that made my blood run cold. It was his eyes. They were empty, hollowed-out, lifeless. Yet, they burned with an unholy light, a light that promised pain, suffering, and death. He stopped blowing the whistle and smiled. "Hello, Danny," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "I've been expecting you." The screams still clawed at my eardrums, phantom echoes in the sterile silence of the day. Carousel music, once a cheerful tune, now twisted into a dirge only I could hear. The image of that girl, eyes wide with stark terror, refused to fade, burned onto the back of my eyelids like a photographic negative. I spent the daylight hours after the carousel incident reviewing every security tape, searching for a flicker, a shadow, anything that might explain the impossible. The tapes showed the girl, her parents, the normal carnival throng. They showed me patrolling, reacting to the screams. But the Pierrot, gone. A ghost in the machine, unburdened by reality. That night, before my shift, I drove to the Blessed Sacrament, a small Catholic church a few blocks from my apartment. I hadn't been inside a church in years, not since Mama was alive. The air inside was thick with incense and silence, heavy as a shroud. I knelt in a pew, the wood cold and unforgiving against my knees. I tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. All I could see was the Pierrot's face, the black teardrops mocking my inadequacy. Leaving the church, I noticed a new poster plastered to a telephone pole near the bus stop. The image of a white-faced clown, a twisted smile, and a single word. It advertised a late-night show at a comedy club downtown. Giggle's House of Horrors. My stomach clenched. It wasn't just the clown. It was the insidious feeling that I was being watched. That the Pierrot was toying with me, leaving breadcrumbs in a horrifying game. The carnival felt different that night. The usual cacophony of sounds seemed muted, as if a layer of cotton had been placed between me and the world. The neon lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters. The air hung heavy, charged with a static electricity that made my skin crawl. I could feel the other workers watching me, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fear. They knew something was wrong, even if they couldn't articulate it. Rounding the corner by the House of Mirrors, I saw it. A single, black balloon, tied to the handle of the fortune teller's trailer. It bobbed gently in the night wind, a silent, ominous sentinel. I approached cautiously, my hand hovering near my useless taser. The balloon was ordinary, plain, except for a single crudely drawn face in white marker. A clown face. 2 black teardrops smeared beneath vacant eyes. Suddenly, the carousel lights began to flicker, even though it was shut down for the night. A low grinding sound, like gears stripped of their teeth, emanated from its depths. The horses began to rock gently, their painted eyes seeming to follow me. I stood frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. The music started, a distorted, warped version of its usual melody. It was slow, mournful, like a funeral dirge played on a broken calliope. The horses began to move faster, their rocking intensifying, their painted eyes now glowing with an unnatural light. Then, I saw him, standing in the center of the carousel, bathed in the eerie glow of the flickering lights. The Pierrot. He was perfectly still, his white face illuminated by the unholy light. He held the silver whistle to his lips. This time, though, instead of blowing, he slowly lowered it. A small, almost dainty gesture, but somehow more terrifying than the shriek it produced. He smiled. It wasn't the sad, melancholic expression I had seen before. This was something else. Cruel, predatory, a wolf baring its teeth. And then, he spoke. His voice was like nails dragging across a chalkboard, a rasping whisper that seemed to claw its way directly into my mind. Lost something, Danny? Mrs. Henderson's words burrowed into my skull, settling there like a colony of termites, gnawing at my sanity. Sorrow and death. Easy enough for her to say, perched behind her fortress of dusty books and dewy decimals. She wasn't the one being hunted by a ghost clown with a homicidal whistle. Leaving the library, the late afternoon sun seemed to mock me, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like malevolent puppets. I needed a drink, something strong enough to cauterize the fear that was eating me alive. O'Malley's was my usual haunt, but the thought of that plastic clown behind the bar, the one that had spooked me before, made my stomach churn. I ended up at a dive further down the strip, a place called the Stardust Lounge, where the only stars were the faded ones painted on the ceiling. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the ghosts of broken dreams. I ordered a double whiskey, neat, and nursed it slowly, trying to drown out Mrs. Henderson's warning. My gaze drifted to the television screen above the bar, tuned to a local news channel. A story about the carnival carousel incident. The little girl was still in a coma, they said. Her parents were holding a vigil at the hospital, praying for a miracle. A grainy photograph of the girl flashed on the screen, her face innocent, hopeful. Bile rose in my throat. The anchor droned on about the ongoing investigation, dismissing the incident as a mechanical malfunction. A mechanical malfunction, my ass. I knew what I had seen. I knew what was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike again. Another whiskey. The bartender, a burly guy with a handlebar mustache and a permanent scowl, eyed me with suspicion. "Rough day, huh?" he grunted. "You have no idea," I muttered, taking a large gulp of the amber liquid. I scanned the room, my senses on high alert. A group of tourists huddled in a booth, their faces flushed with excitement. A lone gambler sat hunched over a video poker machine, his eyes glazed over. A couple argued in hushed tones in a dark corner. Nothing out of the ordinary. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a shiver down my spine. The lights flickered momentarily, plunging the bar into near darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the room. When the lights came back on, everything seemed different, colder, more sinister. Then I heard it. Faint, almost imperceptible, but there. The laughter. That god-awful reedy giggle that had been haunting me for days. It seemed to be coming from the back of the bar near the restrooms. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. The bartender raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay, pal?" "I'll be right back," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I walked towards the restrooms, my hand instinctively reaching for my side. No taser, just my bare hand. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my forehead. The laughter grew louder, closer. It was definitely coming from the restrooms. I reached the door, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The men's room was empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, sterile glow. The air smelled of stale beer and disinfectant. I checked the stalls one by one. Empty. Fine. The laughter persisted, a mocking echo in the back of my mind. I aimed to leave. My nerves stretched to the breaking point. And then I saw it. Scrawled on the mirror above the sink, in what looked like lipstick, was a single word. Boo. Below the word, two crudely drawn black teardrops. The graveyard shift. Always the loneliest, even at a place teeming with manufactured joy and neon-fueled frenzy. Now it was just me in the shadows, elongated and twisted by the half-hearted glow of the carnival's skeletal remains. The dread was a physical thing, a damp wool blanket clinging to my skin. Laughter, always the goddamned laughter. Scratching at the edges of my sanity, closer, ratcheting up the pressure. Funhouses, those places were incubators of nightmares even before the Pierrots set foot in this world. Steeling myself, a deep breath that tasted like stale popcorn and looming doom. I shoved the warped door open. Inside, a funhouse mirror maze that felt less like a game and more like a descent into a fractured psyche. Each reflection was a distorted mockery, funhouse images of me, each one a testament to my failures. The floorboards groaned under my boots, each creak a whispered threat. The air hung thick with the smells of sawdust, cheap cologne, and something else. Something acrid, like burnt sugar and fear. And then I saw him. The Pierrot, center of the maze, bathed in the sickly yellow light of a single flickering bulb, like a spotlight on a stage of horrors. He was holding that silver whistle, the one that made the world bleed sound, and he was blowing. The shriek burrowed into my skull, a dentist's drill scraping bone. I raised the taser, a pathetic gesture against something that defied physics and reason. "Stay the hell back," I yelled, my voice cracking, a frightened kid playing tough. The Pierrot didn't stop, didn't even acknowledge the threat, just kept blowing, his eyes locked on me with unnerving intensity. I squeezed the trigger. The taser prongs hit him square in the chest, sparks spitting, the sound like a sizzling insect. Nothing. He stood there, the taser wires dangling uselessly against his tattered costume, the whistle still pressed to his lips, the sound a constant assault. The laughter swelled, morphing into a cacophony of mocking voices. Each one a memory, a regret, a failure. The mirrors began to spiderweb, the cracks spreading like angry veins across their surfaces. The distorted reflections began to writhe, faces twisting into grotesque caricatures. The floor bucked and swayed, and I felt the world tilt on its axis. Panic slammed into me, cold and suffocating. I tried to run, but the maze had become a trap. Each turn leading back to the same point. The same mocking laughter. The same terrifying figure. He was getting closer, the whistle a beacon of madness. I felt a touch, cold as death on my shoulder. I screamed, a raw animal sound, and spun around, ready to fight, to claw, to do anything to survive. But there was nothing there. Just the mirrors, the warped reflections, the relentless, echoing laughter. The Pierrot's laughter. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the shaking floor, my body convulsing with fear. I knew then, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was finished. He was beyond me, beyond anything I understood. He was darkness given form, evil made manifest, and he was going to break me. The phone rang, a shrill, unwelcome intrusion in the oppressive silence of the apartment. Sarah. Her name flashed on the caller ID like a neon sign screaming a warning. She never phoned. Not really. Texts? Maybe. Careful, measured inquiries about my pathetic existence, thinly veiled attempts to assess the depth of my failure. This was different. The tone was off, like a piano string snapped mid-tune. "Danny," she began, the words stretched thin with a suppressed sob. "It's Michael. He's gone." Michael Doddell, my stepson. A kid, a bright, sparky thing with a gap-toothed grin and a boundless energy that could light up a room. He loved the carnival, the gaudy lights and the sugary smells. Before the divorce, I'd taken him there. The carousel, the rigged games, the sticky cotton candy that coated our faces like clown makeup. Now, he was gone, vanished. Sarah said he'd been playing in the park, a small patch of green near their house. She'd looked away for a heartbeat, to answer her phone, and when she glanced back, nothing. Police were searching, but their voices lacked conviction. I knew. A cold certainty settled in my gut, heavy as a stone. The Pierrot. He was taking everything, stripping my life bare, one agonizing piece at a time. Everything I dared to care about. The park was a pathetic imitation of childhood joy. Swings creaked in the breeze, empty. A slide gleamed under the sterile yellow of the police tape, mocking the missing laughter. A sandbox sat undisturbed, its pristine surface a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside me. Cops milled around, their faces etched with a grim resignation that mirrored my own. Sarah stood near the swings, a broken doll in a floral dress, her face buried in her hands. I approached, my steps heavy, each one a hammer blow against my already fractured hope. I put an arm around her, a gesture that felt clumsy and inadequate. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen, pools of unimaginable pain. "He's gone, Danny," she sobbed, the words ragged, torn from her soul. "He's really gone." I held her tighter, trying to offer some semblance of comfort, but the words died in my throat. Useless. All of it. The Pierrot had him, and the Pierrot didn't give things back. He only took. The next days were a blur of frantic activity, a desperate scramble against an invisible enemy. I searched, followed leads that fizzled into nothing, questioned witnesses whose memories were as unreliable as carnival mirrors. Each dead end tightened the knot of despair in my chest. He was gone, swallowed by the shadows. The police eventually called off the search. Missing person. Cold case waiting to happen. Sarah didn't say it, not directly, but her eyes screamed the accusation. It was my fault. For taking him to the carnival. For exposing him to the darkness that had now devoured him. And she was right. I was the vector, the carrier of this plague. I had brought this upon him, upon us all. Driven by a desperate need to lash out, to make someone pay, I went back to the carnival. A ghost town under a merciless sun. The ride stood silent, skeletal against the sky. The lights were dead, the laughter replaced by the whisper of the wind through the rusted metal. The silence was deafening. I walked through the deserted grounds, calling out the Pierrot's name, my voice hoarse and cracking. A futile gesture. He was gone. Vanished into the ether, leaving only emptiness and the faint, mocking echo of his infernal laughter. I sank onto a rickety bench, the wood splintering beneath my weight. My head in my hands, I felt the weight of everything I had lost. My wife, my stepson, my life. All because of a painted clown and a silver whistle. I closed my eyes, and the image slammed into me with brutal force. His white face, the black teardrops, the mocking smile. He was standing in front of me, bathed in an unholy light, holding the silver whistle to his lips. And he was blowing. The highway shimmered, a mirage of escape in the Nevada heat. A trucker's paradise gone wrong, where hope sputtered and died like a cheap lighter in the wind. A lead, a whisper of salvation carried on the frayed edges of a 911 call. A woman, bless her soul, thought she'd seen Michael. With him. At a greasy spoon 50 miles out. The diner smelled of stale coffee and desperation. The kind of place where dreams went to die. The waitress, a woman with eyes that had seen too much and too little, remembered them. The boy, small and scared, glancing around as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. The clown, she shuddered. Quiet. Too quiet. Didn't say a word, just stared. Like a predator sizing up its prey. The cops, bless their bureaucratic hearts, did their due diligence. A cursory search of the diner, a half-hearted sweep of the surrounding scrubland. Nothing. Dust devils danced on the horizon, mocking our efforts. Hope flickered, a fragile flame in the howling wind of despair. Maybe, just maybe, Michael was still alive. Maybe I could still pull him back from the abyss. We drove, mile after endless mile, the blacktop stretching before us like a road to hell. Gas stations, motels, roadside attractions. Each a potential haven, each a bitter disappointment. They were ghosts, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the desert. Then, a glimpse, a flash of white, a sliver of black against the bleached landscape. A mirage, or something far more sinister. Stop the car, I barked, my voice raw. I stumbled out, the heat hitting me like a physical blow. He was there, standing in a field of withered weeds, the air shimmering around him like a heat stroke hallucination. The Pierrot, holding Michael's hand. Michael looked, hollowed out, pale and drawn, his eyes vacant, reflecting nothing. I ran, a clumsy, desperate sprint, the dust stinging my eyes. Michael, I screamed, my voice cracking. The Pierrot turned, his white face a mask of indifferent cruelty. He raised the silver whistle, the glint of metal catching the unforgiving sun, and blew. The sound was unearthly, a high-pitched shriek that bypassed my ears and went straight into my soul, vibrating through my bones, tearing at my sanity. Michael screamed, a sound that would forever haunt my dreams. He clutched his head, his small body convulsing, writhing in agony. Then he crumpled to the ground, a discarded doll in a field of dust. The Pierrot vanished, just like that, gone, leaving only the echo of that infernal whistle and the unbearable weight of my failure. I rushed to Michael's side, my hands shaking, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I checked for a pulse. Nothing, just the cold, still silence of death. I looked up at the sky, the vast, indifferent expanse of blue mocking my grief. Tears streamed down my face, hot and bitter. I had failed him. I had failed Sarah. I had failed myself. Everything was gone, swallowed by the darkness. And the Pierrot had won. For now, the carousel loomed, a skeletal grin in the sickly moonlight. Each horse, a frozen scream of painted wood, seemed to watch with eyes too knowing, too old. He tasted ash, and the bitter tang of defeat. The metallic stench of blood only he could smell. The blood of a child who was so close. The carnival, once a stage for cheap thrills, was now his personal hell. A canvas painted with loss and despair. "Come out, you coward," he roared, his voice raw, ripped from a throat scorched with grief and rage. "Face me, you son of a bitch." The laughter, thin as ice on a winter pond, echoed from the shadows, slithering through the deserted grounds like a venomous snake. It grew louder, closer, a chorus of mocking whispers that scraped against his sanity. He clenched his fists, his knuckles bone white, the taser clutched like a lifeline in his trembling hand. Then he materialized. The Pierrot, standing in the center of the carousel, bathed in the eerie, fractured light, his white face a mask of serene malevolence. He held the silver whistle, its polished surface gleaming like a shard of a broken mirror. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of nausea churning through his gut. He knew what that whistle could do, what it had done. The Pierrot raised the whistle to his lips. This time, he wouldn't wait for the shriek. He charged, a primal scream tearing from his throat, his legs pumping, his taser raised like a weapon against the darkness itself. He closed the distance, the ground blurring beneath his feet, the image of Michael's vacant eyes fueling his desperate lunge. He fired. The prongs arced through the air, finding their mark, embedding themselves in the Pierrot's chest. Sparks flew, a brief, pathetic display of defiance. Nothing. The Pierrot didn't flinch, didn't even twitch. He simply stood there, the whistle still pressed to his lips, his eyes fixed on him with an unnerving, detached amusement. The electricity crackled and died, leaving only the silence and the mocking grin on the clown's face. The laughter intensified, swirling around him like a vortex, a symphony of madness. Then the carousel began to spin. Slowly at first, a gentle, hypnotic rotation, but then faster, faster, the horses becoming a blur of color, their painted eyes gleaming with an unnatural, feverish light. The air crackled with energy, a palpable force that tugged at him, pulling him towards the whirling carousel. He fought it, digging his heels into the ground, his muscles straining, his will screaming defiance. But it was no use. The force was too strong, too insidious. He was losing control, his body surrendering to the hypnotic spin. The Pierrot stepped off the carousel, his movements fluid, graceful, almost inhuman. He glided towards him, his white face a canvas of pure, unadulterated evil. The silver whistle disappeared into his hand. The Pierrot raised his hand. A searing pain ripped through his chest, a white-hot agony that stole his breath and sent him reeling. He looked down, his vision blurring, his body trembling. There, protruding from his chest, embedded deep within his flesh, was the silver whistle. He gasped for air, his lungs burning, his body convulsing. He knew this was the end. The darkness was closing in, suffocating him, swallowing him whole. The Pierrot smiled, a slow, deliberate unfolding of his painted lips, his black teardrops glistening in the moonlight like drops of frozen ink. He raised his hand, and his fingers danced around another whistle. He raised the silver whistle to his lips and blew. The sound, this time, wasn't just deafening. It was final. A high-pitched shriek that shattered his reality, tearing apart the fabric of his being, erasing everything. And then, nothing. Only blackness. The silence after the shriek was worse than the sound itself. It was the silence of a world holding its breath, waiting for something awful to happen. Then, nothing did. Or at least, nothing immediately obvious. Danny woke up, sprawled on the cracked asphalt of the carnival grounds. The morning sun, a brutal slap in the face after what felt like an eternity in the void. His chest throbbed with a dull ache, a lingering echo of the whistle buried in his heart. But the whistle was gone. He scrambled to his feet, the world tilting precariously. The carnival was deserted, a graveyard of broken dreams under a cloudless sky. The ride stood motionless, monuments to a joy that had curdled into something rotten. The air, though, was different. Cleaner, lighter. The oppressive weight of dread, the feeling of being hunted, had lifted, like a fog burned away by the sun. He walked, his legs shaky and uncertain toward the carousel, the scene of his final disastrous confrontation. The horses were frozen mid-gallop, their painted eyes staring blankly ahead, but something about them had changed. The unnatural gleam, the malevolent spark, was gone. They looked peaceful, serene even, as if they'd finally been released from some terrible spell. He reached out and touched one of the horses, a dappled gray mare with a flowing mane. The wood was cold, lifeless, but the touch didn't send a jolt of fear through him, didn't whisper of impending doom. He knew somehow that the Pierrot was gone. Vanished. Banished. Whatever the hell had happened, it was over. Or so he desperately wanted to believe. The sun felt good on his face, warming his skin, chasing away the lingering chill. He walked out of the carnival, away from the broken dreams and the echoes of laughter, into the waking city. Cars honked, buses rumbled, people hurried by, their faces etched with the mundane worries of everyday life. Life was going on, oblivious to the nightmare that had unfolded within the carnival's gates. But Danny knew he would never be the same. He had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back. He had seen the darkness, felt its icy grip, and it had changed him, marked him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. He drove to Sarah's house, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles ached. He didn't know what to expect. Hope and fear warred within him, a tangled mess of emotions he couldn't untangle. She answered the door, her face pale and drawn, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and grief. She looked at him, a flicker of something like hope battling the ever-present fear. "He's back," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Michael is back." The words hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath, flooding him with a wave of disbelief and overwhelming relief. He was alive. The Pierrot was gone. He should have been ecstatic. He should have been celebrating. But something felt wrong. The relief was tainted, poisoned by a lingering sense of unease, a nagging feeling that this wasn't the end, that the darkness was merely lying dormant, waiting for its chance to rise again. The laughter, the fear, the loss. He knew with a chilling certainty that it would always be a part of him, a permanent scar on his soul. Years bled into each other, indistinguishable shades of gray. The gaudy, skeletal remains of the Las Vegas Carnival were bulldozed, the dust settling to reveal the foundations of a gleaming, soulless casino. Concrete and steel replaced twisted metal and broken dreams. The Pierrot, that grinning ghoul, faded into local lore. A campfire boogeyman whispered to wide-eyed children and drunken tourists. I tried to rebuild my life. A new 9-to-5, pushing paper instead of pushing back the darkness. A sterile apartment miles from the strip, a carefully constructed routine designed to bury the memories. But the Pierrot was a persistent stain, an invisible ink etched onto my soul. He was there in the quiet moments, lurking in the periphery, a phantom limb that throbbed with phantom pain. Then, one sweltering afternoon, the world tilted again. I was walking downtown, lost in the anonymity of the crowd, when I saw him, a street performer, his face painted a stark, unsettling white, 2 black teardrops weeping down his cheeks. The blood drained from my face, leaving me clammy and cold. It couldn't be. Could it? I moved closer, my hand twitching, instinctively reaching for the taser that was no longer there. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and disbelief. The clown saw me coming, his painted face breaking into a smile. Not the mocking, predatory grin of the Pierrot. This was different, genuine, almost friendly. "Hello," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "Would you like a balloon?" I stared, my mind reeling, memories colliding and fracturing. The laughter, the whistle, Michael's vacant eyes. It couldn't be him, could it? "Do I know you?" The words felt foreign on my tongue, clumsy and inadequate. The clown chuckled, a low melodic sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Maybe," he said, his eyes twinkling with an unsettling knowing. "Maybe in another life." He reached into his bag, a worn canvas sack overflowing with brightly colored latex, and pulled out a balloon. He blew it up, his cheeks puffing out, and began to twist it with practiced ease. The air filled with the squeak and groan of the stretched rubber. He handed it to me, a clumsy, misshapen thing that vaguely resembled a dog. "Here," he said, his smile widening. "For you." My hand trembled as I took the balloon, the latex cool and slick against my skin. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the white face, the black teardrops, the gentle curve of his lips. And then, it hit me. The realization slammed into me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air. It wasn't the Pierrot. It was Michael. He had come back, but he wasn't the same. He was altered, changed, something else entirely, something more. He smiled again, a knowing, almost pitying smile that sent a fresh wave of unease washing over me. And then, he vanished. Just like that. Gone. 1 second he was there, holding my gaze with those strange, knowing eyes. The next, the space where he stood was empty. The crowd surged around me, oblivious. I stood there, alone, clutching the misshapen balloon dog, the latex cold and lifeless in my hand. My mind spun, struggling to reconcile the impossible with the undeniable. What had happened to him? What had he become? I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to believe. But I knew one thing. The Pierrot was gone, banished from this world, or so it seemed. But as I clutched the balloon, a new sound emerged. So faint I almost missed it. A whisper of melody. A carousel tune just beneath the surface of reality. I raised the balloon to my nose and inhaled, the scent not of latex, but of cotton candy, popcorn, and something else. Something metallic, like the faint, lingering scent of blood. And that was when I realized that Michael wasn't back for me. He was here to replace him, to be the new Pierrot, to continue the cycle of sorrow and madness. But with a childlike twist that only made it so much worse. He had brought the darkness with him, and it would always be waiting, just beneath the surface, ready to rise again. But he would always make it just different enough to ensure that I never rested. And it would always be my fault.